I know myself as a survivor of childhood sexual trauma. I knew that it happened, but I never dealt with it. Welcome back to the Mom's Wealth Club podcast. Today, we're joined by Kristen Jacobsen. She's a psychotherapist, an author, a speaker, and a coach who helps high achieving women break free from anxiety, perfectionism, and the subconscious beliefs that keep you stuck. Kristen is the founder of Cathartic Space Counseling and Kristen Jacobsen Coaching and Consulting. She's shared her messages on the TEDx stage. She's been featured in major media outlets, including CBS News, the Chicago Tribune, Psych Central, and Very Well Mind. She's the author of the book Unpacked: How to Detach from the Subconscious Beliefs That Are Sabotaging Your Life. Kristen, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, first of all, you were probably my highest achieving guest that I've ever had. Like your accolades go on and on. But the most important thing to me is who you are as a person. I'm so happy that you're here. We have become friends, and you are one of the most sincere and kindest and compassionate people that I have in my world. And I'm so grateful for you. And I'm so happy and honored that you're on my podcast today.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet.
I guess let's just get started. Where did your journey start? I know you've written a book and you've been on this journey, and there's a reason that most of us, when we find our purpose, it can be traced back to different things in our past. So start wherever's comfortable with you, from the beginning, from the middle, whatever that looks like.
I personally have struggled with anxiety pretty much my entire life. And, I was born in 81, so going to therapy wasn't really much of a thing. It was still very much stigmatized. So I just kind of grew up dealing with it on my own and wasn't really able to name it as anxiety probably until I got to college or so and started learning more about psychology and whatnot. So I actually went to college with the intent of teaching elementary school. And then when I was there, I took an abnormal psychology course and I was just hooked. I was like, this is it. This is, my calling. This is what I'm meant to do. Then just, kind of I went to grad school. I learned more about the field and sort of the different specializations and really took an interest in childhood trauma, developmental trauma. A lot of that stuff is also unrecognized unless it's sort of a big T trauma like we would consider like sexual assault or, being held up at gunpoint, something like that. But there's some more insidious stuff that can happen that really shape the way we see ourselves or other people or the world. And yeah, that's how I got into the field. I also have my own history with childhood trauma. So it's just it's both personal and professional for me.
When you're working with women, how do you break into helping them? Because by the time somebody comes to speak to somebody, their life is a little bit chaotic, right? We just keep, especially women, successful women, we just keep burying it. I know myself as a survivor of childhood sexual trauma. I knew that it happened, but I never dealt with it. And until I started working through this process in the last 12 months, maybe 18 months, I didn't even know I was textbook in so many ways for that being such a block because it's just something that happened and never dealt with it. So the reason that I came for help, well, not to you, but when I came for help was because life was just not getting better. And I know there's so many times in my life where it's been horrible. So when people come to your door and they knock on your door, they call you, they get on your website and they're reaching out for help, things are pretty bad.
Yeah. The types of clients I work with they're sort of white knuckling their way through life, and so it's like they've been doing that for so long, and finally it's something shifts where they realize like, okay, I've tried everything I could on my own. A lot of them have actually been to therapy before and felt like the therapist was just kind of a listening ear for them to vent, but they weren't making any changes. And so usually when clients seek me out, they're ready. They're ready to make a change. They're motivated and they'll come to me for typically what is going on in the present, but once we get into it, it's all connected to the past.
It is for sure. And your book, Unpacked, that is that process, right? Walk us through what that process kind of looks like just overall when you're working with women.
Yeah, so it focuses on kind of what I refer to as like self-sabotaging behaviors. So this can look like, perfectionism, procrastination, imposter syndrome, things that are holding us back and are really sort of self-limiting beliefs, self-limiting ways of operating. But all of those things formed as protection from earlier life experiences. So a lot of times people will have feelings of inadequacy or feeling undeserving or feeling like their value or worth is dependent on performance. And so what Unpacked does is it sort of looks at the like what's going on in the present and kind of guides people through how they can trace that back. And then, once we have awareness of those things, then we can start to heal them or change them. But all of us have blind spots. And so the book is to sort of help people uncover those blind spots.
Unpack those blind spots.
Unpack, yes. Hence the title.
So, was this something that you discovered part of this as you were going through your healing? Like a lot of times we have people that will lose weight and then they figured something out and then they're able to bring people along with them. Has this been part of your journey? I know you have a lot of schooling and a lot of things like that, but how does your story kind of fit into how you help people?
Yeah, I think it really became apparent when I started having my own adult relationships. I don't know how well versed people are in sort of the different types of attachment, but if you're anxiously attached, it means that there's sort of this insecurity that your partner is going to leave or cheat on you or you'll be abandoned in some way. And I started seeing that play out in relationships when I was in my 20s, and I was like, this doesn't feel very good or normal. And so I really started exploring that and kind of you know, tracing back where that comes from, why that was happening, things like that.
And so, what is the ideal scenario for someone? I know everybody's individual, but when you're walking through helping women, what is a success story? Like the behind the scenes or however we want to, the things you don't see or the journey, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I do a lot of what's called parts work. It comes from a model called internal family systems. And so it sort of looks at these things that we try to push away or avoid or that we see as being sort of like bad qualities to ourselves. And it looks at them through this protective lens. Like all of these parts of us are serving a purpose and they have a function. They are trying to protect us from something. And so once we start trying to understand the intent behind these parts, we can have a little bit more compassion toward them and not be so judgmental, right? A lot of us are just so judgmental of these different parts of ourselves that show up, and it's like, well, that part was created for a reason, and we just need to understand why, and then we can kind of start just building a different relationship with these parts. And I know that's a very abstract idea, but when I'm talking about these parts, it could be a defensive part or an anxious part or an angry part or a perfectionistic part, all of those types of things.
And there's a couple things you said there. First of all, we are our own worst critic. So we can
Hmm.
probably say a lot of that worst critic stuff comes back as a trauma response. And I didn't know what any of this stuff was.
Hmm.
I avoided it for years, turning to drugs and alcohol and sex and wildlife and all that stuff, starting at a very young age to just bury
Hmm.
whatever I didn't want to deal with, not knowing because I was functional on the outside, right? I wasn't inwardly. But if you were to meet me, I was a good member of society, unless you saw me at 2 a.m. or whatever. And soon as I got pregnant with my first child, my whole life changed in behavior, but my pain was still deep seated. And it's crazy. So now I'm learning these words like trauma response, and you're saying um, things like what that is, whether it's anxiety and stuff. So are they're like some kind of subconscious strategies or something that we get. So what does that mean? Explain that to the audience a little bit, because why am I self-sabotaging? Why am I a perfectionist? And sometimes people will tie it real loosely and say, "Oh, my mom was hard on me," or whatever, but it's actually something more internal, right? And something that we do.
Yeah, so what we're conscious of lives in our minds, right? We have conscious thoughts that we are aware of. And then what is subconscious typically lives in our nervous system. So these are things that, something might happen and you might have a reaction to it and be like, where did that come from? Because objectively looking at it, it was pretty benign. It wasn't a big deal, but there was something in your body that was reacting. Your nervous system was reacting. And so that's kind of where the subconscious lives, is in your nervous system. And even when we're in utero or before we have language, the experiences we have sort of train our nervous system, right? We humans are meant for survival, not success. And so starting from, infancy, our goal is just to be safe, right? And that's just human nature. It's not something that we're like consciously thinking of. So when we have these reactions, they're coming from somewhere pretty deep seated, but we don't have the connection to like conscious thought. And so that's what I kind of try to help clients with, is bridging that gap between, okay, what am I feeling? What have I been stuffing down for years and years and years to keep going? And, that's going to come out as physical pain. That's going to come out as like a suppressed immune system. It's going to come out as a disproportionate reaction to a situation. And that can be, but we are not making those connections. That can be kind of confusing.
Yeah, and it is because until I started on this journey, obviously I knew there was something wrong. I knew that I had anger responses or internal feelings of self-hatred and all this stuff that I could bury, but I never and you really need to kind of get this point where you're like, nothing is working. I mean, I guess it was because I've got a happy marriage. I've got great kids. I've got, I can make money. So it's weird because different people have their different floors, like their, what do you call it, where you hit the bottom. Different people have different bottoms. And I finally, I guess it wasn't like some outward bottom, but I was just tired. I was tired of hitting a ceiling that I began to realize I was that ceiling. So that was a long journey. Making it to almost 60 years old and go like, oh my gosh, all the wasted years and as we're learning about finances, how if I could have put things in play even 10 years ago. But that's why we're here today, to let women know that if you aren't where you want to be, there might be a reason and you might not even be conscious of it, right?
Absolutely. Hmm.
So, how does this fit into finances? Because that's what brought me to it.
Yeah, so we can have financial trauma as well. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that we experience bankruptcy or any of what we might call like a big T trauma, but it could be if we grew up and our parents had a scarcity mindset, that's what we internalize. And so we sort of see money as being in lack, and that there's not enough, there's never enough. And money is paper. It's a tool, and we're the ones who assign meaning to it, right? It very much mirrors sort of relationships with humans. You can think of money as a relationship. We have a relationship with money, and that can be healthy and beneficial, or it can be pretty toxic and unhealthy in that way.
And that can go both ways. It can be, I don't have a lot of money and it's not a good relationship with money. Maybe I'm not worthy or whatever that's tied into. Or somebody that has an abundance of money, there could be a problem with it on the other side. And we see that as we're working through this. And I know you probably coach people, and I'm in groups, masterminds, and whatnot, where we've got people on all over the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not so much dependent upon how much money you have. It's like it's your relationship with it. So, to your point, people can be extremely wealthy, but might have a hard time spending that money because they feel undeserving, or they might have a hard time spending it because they think it's going to be taken away at any moment. And then with people who don't have as much money as they would like, a lot of it does come down to worth and, whether they're deserving of it. And again, that's going to, it's sort of like looking through a pair of glasses that just skews everything. And so you are only paying attention to things that confirm that belief. That's just, we all do it. That's how our brains are wired, right? So if it's I'm not worthy of being financially well off, or I'm not worthy of good things, then your brain is going to seek out things that reinforce that idea, versus if it's a more positive belief that, like, there's abundance and I'm worthy of being financially successful, your brain starts seeking out more opportunities to make that your reality.
And that's crazy, because if you would have told me this a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have thought I'm not worth it. Like it's so obvious in hindsight, and when you're looking into it, like whatever your reaction to it is, when you finally have that epiphany, and it's not just one thing for me, but it's lots of little things. um if it's things aren't right, there's a reason, so you got to start digging in. And when somebody starts going through this process with you, how do you help them through and help them discover what might be so subconscious that they're not even aware, other than what's happening around them, that some because okay, a lot of things on the outside, like what's happening on the surface, is not anything of what it really is, right? Do you find that?
Yeah, it's sort of what's happening on the surface can be a manifestation of whatever the pain is, right? It's sort of like how that pain, or even those subconscious beliefs kind of present themselves. You can kind of think about it in that way. But yeah, I actually, just the other day, a client of mine gave the analogy. She was like, I feel like I'm a house, and outside I have a really manicured lawn and everything is perfect and looks great. And inside I'm a hoarder. And I'm like, wow, that's a really interesting and great way to describe it. That, like, externally things can look great, but internally it does not feel that way.
And I think that's probably true of a lot of successful women, that whatever the level of success is, whether lacking, that you feel like you're lacking, or abundance, is that well manicured lawn. But what's in the house? That's really good. I relate to that one for
Yeah.
sure. So I know we talked a little bit about having an inner critic, and mine is very, very loud, right? And I think it's that whole term is becoming more mainstream. People are starting to understand it. But what does that mean, and how does it affect us in our life, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, so each of us has an inner critic. I'm sure you're all very familiar with yours, and it's just that little kind of voice in your head that judges you, right? It's critical of whatever you're doing. A lot of times this is prevalent in terms of parenting, right? I think being a mom in this day and age is extremely challenging. It is also very prevalent in our professional lives. And a lot of the clients I work with, they sort of have this belief that their inner critic is partially responsible for their success, because if your inner critic is constantly telling you to do better, that wasn't good enough, to try harder, then it feels like that's motivating you. And in a way it is, in a way it can be, but it's motivation by fear. And that is not a great way to live, right? It's motivated by, okay, well, I don't want to feel inadequate, or I don't want to feel not good enough. So I need to berate myself in order to be successful and do these great things. And that's just not a healthy or happy way to live. So we kind of call that avoidance motivation, right? We're avoiding a negative feeling or a negative belief about ourselves. And then we sort of get into approach motivation, and that is when we are focused on what it is we want to achieve or whatever goal we want to reach, and there's more intention behind that. So we're not motivated by beating ourselves up. We're motivated by whatever that intention behind it is, the why behind why, why we want that achievement, why we want to reach that goal, and how does that align with our values in life. And so that's just a much more aligned way to live, right? If we're living in alignment with our values, with what we feel is most important in life, like that's the way to live, right? It's not by constantly running and having things be motivated by fear.
And do you think it's rare to have that person that is motivated by their purpose and their why?
I think it is rare. I think people who have gotten there have probably done a ton of work on themselves. And, whether that's through like therapy or mental health or just personal development or however they came to that way of being. I think a lot of us are motivated by fear. We live in a very fear-based culture.
100%. Fear sells, right? It sells products,
Yeah.
it sells the news, all of the things.
Hmm. Yeah.
So very conditioned for that, for sure. And I think it's like women of my generation, I'm much older than you. Our parents came from the Depression era. I think a lot of things are handed down. You mentioned something earlier that it started in utero, and that's crazy to me. But I think if our body is just chemicals and electricity and chemicals, and we can feel it when things are happening. I think about myself personally. So I was adopted, but my mother was a young mom. The father's not even listed on the birth certificate. And I'm just like, what kind of chemicals were going through her body that I was born into, right? That I was soaking in for 9 months. Like, that's crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in the book, I talk about like generational trauma. And so even, going back to like the Holocaust and stuff, just the way people who endured that, the way their nervous systems got conditioned and wired in being in that constant state of threat, like that's passed down from generation to generation and can show up in people nowadays. So yeah, if a mom is in a very high stress environment, then it can absolutely impact how the baby develops. I'll take my own son, for example. He was a pandemic baby. He's almost 6, but he was born in July of 2020, and we were all extremely anxious for several years, and it's been a pattern with kids his age that they just tend to be a little bit more anxious and activated. It's a pattern that we've seen in kids those age. So that's another example of how that could show up.
Well, he's blessed to have you as his mom, and you can maneuver him through that as best you can, better than somebody that might not understand how it works and how that's affecting. They might say, oh, my child is nervous around strangers, or my child is doing poorly at school, to see us as a whole human being and affected by all the things around us, you can use different tools to hopefully help our kids succeed, right?
Yeah, I think we oftentimes look at our kids' behaviors as being like problematic or bad or something that needs to be fixed. And so we kind of take a very shaming approach at times, whereas all behavior is a form of communication. All emotions are a form of communication, right? Emotions are messengers for ourselves, and behavior is messengers for other people. And so if we look at behaviors, not just with children, but other people, as like with curiosity instead of judgment, like, I wonder where that's coming from, right? I wonder what that's all about. Then we can just have a much more compassionate approach to that person and their behavior. Even people who are just straight up assholes. I hope I can curse on this podcast.
Burst away, baby.
Yeah, like even people who are just like the rudest, meanest people, it's like that's coming from somewhere, you know? So it's just human behavior is just so fascinating to me.
And it's weird because I was at the grocery store yesterday. It was dinner time, and this probably 2.5, 3 year old was very upset. And he was hitting his mom, and mom's trying to check out, and she's just holding him back. And now I wonder, as a mom today, if that was my kid going through everything that I've gone through and worked through the last year and a half. I know what I did in the past with my kids. It's not ideal, right? But I wonder what I would do now. And I did feel a compassion for him versus what I might, in full transparency, have felt 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I would have been, oh my gosh, that kid, that mom, I don't know. It just judgmental. Do you think that as human species, we jump to the negative more than jumping to the positive, or is that just me?
No, absolutely. And again, it's a survival mechanism, right? When, the cavemen existed, they had to be on high alert for what was a danger. So they were constantly scanning for negatives, is something hiding in the bushes? Are these berries poisonous? And so it's really an evolutionary thing that our brains naturally scan for the negative because it's a survival response, and then bring in sort of the inner critic, and the more judgmental we are to ourselves, the more judgmental we are to other people, and all of that. But yeah, I think just really trying to look at people through that lens of curiosity and compassion, and especially with kids, a lot of times we, I think, have almost like too high of expectations that like they're kids, they don't know how to regulate their emotions. It's our job to teach them that, right? And I mean, I'm guilty of this. Like if my 5-year-old's acting up and I get really upset or angry, and that doesn't help the situation at all. It actually just, makes it worse. And so I've really tried to be intentional about, okay, I know he can't, like, this is not intentional. He's not misbehaving. He's just dysregulated. And how do I kind of center myself to help him get centered and calm his emotions down?
That's huge. What are those tools? Because I remember I used to, I guess, after I got angry with my kids or whatever, and I 100% expected more of my kids their entire life than their age or mental growth or whatever would dictate that that's how much I should have put on them in a lot of ways, like everything. Just they were like mini adults. And I remember after I would leave the situation going, I can't even regulate, or I didn't know those words or those terminologies. Like, I can't even behave correctly. What am I modeling for them? Right? And yeah, it's crazy as I've gotten older and they've gotten older, and we started tiptoeing into personal development for business before I started getting into the real mental health and the trauma help. I used to say to them, I just don't have the tools to deal with this. I just don't have the tools. And I'm like, of course, I'm expecting them at 12 years old and 9 years old to be able to step up to my level to go, oh, mom's like, she's lost it because she doesn't have the tools. Like, well, we don't have the tools. But at the time, it was my way of like, right before the apology or right before, just go, we're going to figure this out, girls. Because I'm bringing them with me to business conferences, which was a lot of personal development. So I'm like, this is why we're doing all of this stuff. And this is why you're coming with me because I don't know. I just know I want it to be different. I didn't have the tools. So it's a long way of me asking you, what are some tools that a mom or even just a woman in business, maybe their kids are already grown up, maybe they didn't have children. How do we, as women who want to be successful, want to feel happy, how do we deal with life? What are some of the, like I said, tools that you would recommend to somebody?
Yeah, so really anything that is gonna help calm your nervous system. And, there's a lot of like fluff out there about self-care, and that's great. Like, yeah, go get a massage. You're gonna feel good for, an hour or whatnot. But the real work is trying to give your nervous system a reset throughout the day. And that can take 30 seconds. It can be a matter of doing some deep breathing for 30 seconds. There are, a million different types of breathing techniques out there. I'm not going to go through each one, but it can be really anything that calms your vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve goes from the base of your skull pretty much to every organ. So if you send signals to that nerve that, hey, we're safe, things are okay, it's gonna, have that impact on the rest of your body. So again, there are a whole bunch of like vagus nerve exercises or ways to tone the vagus nerve out there. If you do a quick Google or YouTube search, you can find those pretty easily. But the goal is to do them several times throughout the day. It's kind of like just pressing a reset button for your nervous system. And, our nervous systems are meant to kind of move in and out of like being activated and not activated throughout the day. That's a normal progression, but it's sort of when we get stuck in one of those states, like a fight or flight state, which is often the case with people who are very anxious or feel very stressed, right? We sort of need to press that reset button for our nervous system.
For sure. And you have incidences of high stress, but we stay there because we're constantly being bombarded. Social media, just life, all of the things, with too much information. We know about things that are happening around the other side of the world that may or may not ever affect us, but it's causing additional stress that our baseline, I feel like, is raised so high from ever being able to just come back normal. The up, the down, the up and down of the caveman. He gets back in his cave. He's like, oh, we escaped that. Let's chill out for a minute. There's no chilling out in modern society.
Yes, absolutely. We're just inundated with stuff. And again, kind of going back to that fear mongering, all news is sort of clickbait, right? They want to get you hooked, and pretty much all news is negative. So I think even just like limiting exposure to the news. You want to stay informed, but then there are people who will really go down the rabbit hole of like story after story after story, and you're just kind of um, priming your nervous system to stay in that fight or flight response. And so, really being intentional about, all right, how do I create little pockets of calm and safety and being just sort of present focused, feeling connected to other people like that. That's where our nervous system feels most safe.
It's interesting to do it throughout the day, not just after maybe you get angry or you have a stress incident or whatever. But I just heard you say that, and maybe I've heard it before, but when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Thank you, teacher. That throughout the day, it's like working a muscle is almost how I related that in my mind for this vagus nerve calming thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely like working a muscle. Yeah. And the more you do it with the more consistency, then you don't have to like think as much about it, right? It just becomes sort of automatic. And because you're just more regulated, right? So you're not going to get stuck in that fight or flight state or that shutdown state quite as easily or for quite as long or whatever the case may be.
So that's so cool. Well, I appreciate your time. Like this conversation has been really good. I hope it's been eye-opening for people, but we haven't even started, right? We haven't even scratched the surface. I know you have an amazing TED Talk. I want to go ahead and link that in the show notes. I will also put the link for your book, Unpacked, on Amazon. I don't get any Amazon cred for that at all, but I want to have it just easy for somebody to go and grab it because I think it's going to be really powerful for somebody that's looking for something more. And then if somebody wanted to really have the opportunity to be coached or do therapy with you, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Probably just going to my website, which is catharticspacecounseling.com, and all of my social accounts are linked on there. People can shoot me an email or schedule a consultation or whatnot. That's sort of a one-stop shop.
That's perfect. And you mentioned earlier that you had had therapy sessions and it was just a waste of time. I tried several different times through my life and it just seemed like a waste of money. Hooking up with the right person can be life-changing for sure. You never know if you're the right person unless they reach out and have that first conversation with you personally, not just here. But hopefully this episode was helpful. It's a little bit different than some of the things we talk about, but I 100% know that how we view ourselves is very important to our finances. But on the other side of that, if we have our finances and we fix our finances and we're still dealing with all of these things, then it shows up in other ways, health, relationships. If your finances are great and your health is bad, Steve Jobs couldn't save his life with his money. We are a whole package, and I think it's really important to handle all of it and to work with all of it. Thank you so much for being my guest today. I think this was so just powerful, and I think that it can really help people.
Thanks so much, Lynn. I had a great time.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the Mom's Wealth Club today. I know that we talked to so many amazing women, and I don't want you to miss any of them. So if you liked what you heard today, you're interested to hear what we're going to talk about next week, go ahead and like and subscribe. Reach out to Kristen with any questions that you have. And until next time, go ahead, buy the field, plant the vineyard, and watch it multiply.